Hello, welcome to the Ukrainian Studies Organization at Indiana University. I'm Natalia Shpilova-Said, and thank you so much for attending our event today. I'm delighted to welcome Oleksandr Yaroshchuk, and he will present on Russian disinformation war against Ukraine, examples of strategic narratives. Oleksandr Yaroshchuk is a Ph.D. candidate in mass communications and a senior lecturer at the Mohyla School of Journalism, National University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. He is in the process of preparing a dissertation on the status of investigative journalism in Ukraine. Currently, he is a Fulbright Researcher at the Indiana University Media School. For the last 3 years, Oleksandr has been working for the Ukrainian fact-checking organization StopFake, where he exposes Russian media's fakes against Ukraine. We will start with a lecture. Please submit your comments and questions via our Q&A option, which you can see at the bottom of the screen. All questions and comments will be addressed after our lecture. If you would like to ask your questions directly, please let me know and I can promote you to the status of panelist and you will be able to participate in our discussion. At this point, I would like to welcome Oleksandr. Thank you again for joining us today.
Good afternoon and good evening, everyone. So it's a pleasure for me to be today to present my talk. I've been several times listening to other talks, and it's a nice platform where we can, I believe, exchange our ideas and share our experiences. So my lecture would be, first of all, focusing on how Russian disinformation campaign is working against Ukraine and how it is directed against Ukraine. And first of all, I will be talking about our StopFake experience because it's the most closest to my experience and to what I am doing as a researcher and as a journalist at the moment. And also would like to congratulate everyone with International Vyshyvanka Day, and I decided to wear Vyshyvanka for this occasion as well. So I will first of all share my screen and my presentation, which is just a second, please. Okay, just it's okay. It's here. I hope you all can see it. I will focus on several aspects. First of all, on the disinformation ecosystem of Russian Federation, both in general aspects and in Ukraine at the moment. I will also focus on the key strategic narratives. I believe this would be a subjective choice of myself, the one I believe the most important and the most widespread among all of the strategic narratives. I would like to emphasize that there are, of course, dozens, maybe even hundreds of the narratives. However, I selected up to 5 narratives, which are the most widespread, and I will give some examples of these narratives further. I will also share with you some of my opinions concerning what are the current and old strategic influence techniques used by Russia, as well as why Russia uses them, for what are the purposes. Can I do this? Okay. So, but first of all, of course, I will present my the project I am working on and the project I am working with. So this is StopFake. StopFake was launched in March 2014, exactly on March 2nd, 2014, during the annexation of Crimea. This was actually one of the first, or even the first civil society project directed at debunking pro-Kremlin Russian disinformation. And at that time, we were focusing on fakes and disinformation concerning Crimea, obviously, but then we started debunking fakes about Donbass, about different aspects of Ukrainian internal political life, and also concerning different aspects of internal political life in other countries which relate to Ukraine. So as I said, the project debunks pro-Kremlin Russian disinformation. and especially with the one which is published in the media. Its main focus is Crimea and Donbass and Ukraine in general. At the moment, we cooperate with several other projects. One of them is EU versus Disinformation project, and also we are a third-party fact-checking member at the Facebook fact-checking initiative. And also, I would like to say that our site is available in up to 15 languages, so you can read in the most convenient languages of your choice. To begin the lecture, I would like also to discuss some of the important questions, I believe, which are important as of today. The first question concerns this, the whole idea of the post-truth world and the world discussions about in which world we live now, in information or disinformation world. Sometimes we forget that disinformation accompanied media and accompanied political life for centuries. Especially it became a part of the political life in the 20th century due to different processes, both in the Soviet Union and in the United States of America as well. And different manipulative techniques were used both in the First World War, in the Second World War, in the period between the World Wars and in the Cold War period. And as I said, disinformation used to be an important tool. Which is, however, it was not the only tool. Disinformation was only among the tools available at the time that they used. And for some reasons, and I believe that disinformation in this sense somehow replaced censorship in the way it is used to promote some of the narratives that governments believe are important to them, and the narratives which will be some goals that they want to achieve. And actually, in the 20th century, and especially today, and Russian Kremlin strategy is very of a good example in this way, is that they use free media, liberal media in the way they want to use, and they use all of these mechanisms liberal and free media provide to pursue their own agenda and to disseminate disinformation. And this is actually how the world, how the media and the world of media has changed over the last 50 and 100 years. And later I will show you how, in one of the examples, how this pro-Kremlin disinformation media, how they manipulate all of this features that free media propose, especially the freedom of speech, how they manipulate it and how they use it for their own goals. Also, sometimes we hear that in the 21st century, especially after 2014, when this huge disinformation campaign against Ukraine started, that we live in this post-truth disinformation world. As I told before, it's not quite correct to say it this way, because disinformation was an important tool in the 20th century. However, what changed is that at the moment, the governments and the companies who wants to distribute disinformation has more tools to use. For instance, this is cyber attacks or digital media, social networks in the first place. And at the moment, they can distribute this information via different groups, for instance, in Facebook, in other social media, and to create so-called bubbles of information where people exchange information or this disinformation, where they engage with each other ever. And when this information becomes popular, and other people willingly or unwillingly consume this information as well. At the moment, this information and every information, each piece of information can be distributed more easily in a matter of seconds and you can reach billions of people. You can have much more huge audiences that you might have in the 20th century. And people start to live in this, somehow in this disinformation ecosystem, and actually this information system, information world, it becomes really contaminated with disinformation. Another thing here is that there is a lot of deliberate manipulation, which is distributed by the politicians, by the different influence groups. And the other factor, I believe, that promoted this rise of disinformation and this lack of factual information is that people do not trust in media, and this trust started to deteriorate in the 20th century, in the end of the 20th century, and continues today. Another question is, do facts still matter? Of course, they still matter, and that's why we at StopFake and other projects try to debunk pro-Russian disinformation. And another is, what is our role as journalists? What should we do to resist disinformation, fakes in media? And this also, as for me, it's obvious, and I hope it's obvious for you, that we have to debunk, we have to propose other strategies, we have to pay attention to what we say and what others say, and to be as much active as we can. So I will try gradually to change the topic and to move forward to this particularly Kremlin's and Russians disinformation campaign against Ukraine. So first of all, we should understand and remember what are the Kremlin's goals, because without understanding this, we won't be able to understand what methods do they use and why do they use exactly this methods. So first of all is they want to weaken democratic institutions in Ukraine and in the West. And disinformation and different active measures, they use political measures, economic pressure, etc., are the best tools in this way, because they can pay some politicians or pay for information to be distributed via even some credible news organizations, and to create some political parties, political groups that can influence internal discussions inside societies. Basically, they use this on several levels. So if we take, for instance, bigger picture like Europe, European Union, they want to solve distrust between different EU member states and inside the EU member states, because this is the way they can manipulate public opinion in the states and how they can influence outcomes of political processes in these states. The same applies to Ukraine, because Ukraine is, as for me, and I believe for them too, Ukraine is the most important for Russia as a country, as the goals that they want to pursue. I want to have Ukraine in their sphere of influence. The other thing is that they want to solve divisions, distrust between Ukraine and the West, and also to undermine reform processes, because without reforms, Ukraine won't be able to achieve its goals, which are accession to NATO and the EU. The other thing is that they usually refocus attention. So for instance, when something bad happens in Russia, they want to blame in this what happened to Ukraine or other state, or they just claim that situation in Ukraine is much worse than in Russia. And the fifth point here would be to restore the Soviet or Union or Russian Empire, at least partially, with Ukraine and Belarus the most to be the most close to Russia at the strategic partners. So this is their goal. I hope that they won't achieve it, but they are steadily moving into this direction. The major instruments of influence, we have, of course, disinformation. However, besides disinformation, we have other instruments which are used. So these are cyber attacks, which is an invention of the 21st century mainly. bribes when they pay different politicians. First of all, politicians inside the countries they want to divide. Military interference. In this case, they use this several times so far in Georgia and in Ukraine and in Moldova when they create some areas of tension, military areas of tension, and try to in this way to influence the decisions of the governments of the respective countries. Energy sector and business is another important way instrument of influence, because by manipulating, for instance, gas flows, they can influence what the governments, what decisions the governments take. And their project Nord Stream 2 is an exemplary in this way, how they use it to bypass Ukraine and threaten Ukrainian energy and political independence, and the independence of the Baltic states, and especially of the European Union. Some analysts say that today, due to some processes inside the European Union, this instrument is not as important as it was, as it had been. However, I doubt this, because still it influences what decisions are taken, for instance, in Germany, and how governments and societies debate on this, and what they shall do, or what they should do or shouldn't. But however, of course, our main focus of the StopFake and my own focus is information manipulation. And in this fact, this approach, information manipulation, is used also with different instruments, tools, and for different purposes. And here I give some examples of how do they use information manipulation, and what are the type of content they provide using this type of an instrument. So for instance, I would like here to pay attention that they use it to distribute, first of all, false information, or so-called alternative facts, by proposing different types, different versions of events. For instance, as in MH17 case. I will show this example later, but just to explain this a little bit further, I would add that they try to create as many versions of this event as possible. And however, the ultimate goal, for instance, in this case, is to accuse Ukraine of donning the airplane. And they try to create in their audience the view that and the understanding that this was Ukraine. How did it do it? This is another perspective. Another important thing here is that they mix facts with opinions, and this happens often. So they provide opinions, but they claim that these are the facts. They shift responsibility by claiming that this is done by Ukraine, not by Russia. Or they use historical revisionism. What I mean here is that they try to rewrite history, for instance, about Soviet Union, about the importance of Ukraine as of Ukrainian nation to defeat the Nazi Germany. Or they tried to downgrade the importance of allied powers and how they helped the Soviet Union to win the war. And inciting hatred is another important tool they use, because they promote different hate speeches in their media concerning Ukrainians. However, they implicate in promoting hatred Ukrainian media, which is not true. So it happens vice versa. So the other, yes, and here we come to the disinformation sources, or the so-called disinformation ecosystem. Usually, Russian propaganda or disinformation ecosystem consists of 5 pillars. First of all, these are the official government communications or press services. We often encounter disinformation coming from, for instance, Dmitry Peskov, who is the press secretary of the Russian President Vladimir Putin, or of the press service of the Ministry for Foreign Affairs. Another important group of this ecosystem is are state-funded media. And I will later show some examples of this media which are most often distribute the information. The third group is proxy sources. The proxy sources are usually those who are not directly associated with the Russian state, with the Russian government, but are indirectly financed by, for instance, some of the state enterprises like Gazprom, or financed by some politicians close to the Kremlin, both in Russia and in Ukraine and in other states. They also weaponize the social media by using the trolls or bots, and here's an example would be the Trolls Factory, St. Petersburg's Trolls Factory. And also they use different cyber technologies, cyber techniques to both distribute this information and to target other countries' cyber structures, cyber technologies. So the most important state-funded media are this one. So they both use information agencies, TV channels, and different international platforms they created so far. For instance, TASS has been actually an important propaganda and disinformation source for the last 70 years, since 1940. Actually, this role was TASS gained this role in 1939 when, during the Winter War with Finland, Soviet Union tried to use this agency as a tool to promote a Soviet version of events and to collect information about how media of other countries report about the events in Finland. And it used to be done in this way, that also the head of TASS was selected by the leaders of the Soviet Union Communist Party. So they had the direct influence on what was written in this and what was reported by TASS. Today, actually, this ecosystem is much bigger, and you see that these are only a couple of the most important, important TV channels and sources they use, because other sources try to take information they distribute and to republish it, or add some minor opinions to what these sources publish. And some of them are directed. They try to target only Russian audiences like Russia 1 or Russia 24, but others like RT and Sputnik, they have multiple language versions and target different audiences, not only in Russia, but in the United States, the UK, Germany. Sputnik, for instance, has versions in the so-called South Ossetia, Abkhazia, Moldova, and many other countries as well. And this is the bigger, I would say, the bigger list of different sources that also distribute this information. Some of them I mentioned on the previous slide. Here we just point your attention that there are some proxy sources here as well, like news agency Kharkov or Ukrainian.ru, which is actually controlled by RIA Novosti. However, it's like positions itself as a media which publishes information about Ukraine and events in Ukraine from, however, Russian perspective, of course. Also, in almost in every country, they have some proxy outlets that distribute disinformation inside this country. In the case of Ukraine, I selected here the most, I would say, popular, the most well-known channels of disinformation that they use. Here we have two TV channels, Nash and First Independent, and one online outlet, which is Strana.ua. This one here, the first independent TV channel, was created recently after Ukraine banned three other channels owned by Viktor Medvedchuk. This were Zik, 112, and News One channel, and they decided they actually bought this one First Independent from another company and rebranded it and transformed it into the channel that they now use as their tool to promote their narratives. It both solved the Kremlin's goals and the goals of the political parties in Ukraine, which are close to the Kremlin. And Nash is also owned by one of the politicians who is close to the Kremlin. The same actually the Strana.ua, however, it's a little bit more complicated since its ownership is more tricky than in these two cases, we might say. However, all of them work for the Kremlin, or at least partially work for the Kremlin, because they have this type of information that serves Kremlin's purposes, first of all, and undermines Ukrainian independence in many cases. So I'll move to the next one. And my conclusion here would be that disinformation is really a Kremlin state policy. And here is, I would say, a good picture to show this, how Margarita Simonyan, who is an editor-chief of RT, receives a medal from Russian President Vladimir Putin. And she is not the only one, but this is the most, I would say, instrumental, the best example we can have so far. And here are some narratives. I believe there are 5 of them, but we will see. So the first one is that Ukraine is a Nazi state. Of course, we can combine here different narratives into one that pro-Kremlin sources claim. First, these are like Ukraine is a fascist state, Ukraine is a Nazi state, Ukraine is ruled by a junta. They can all this combine into one sentence, or that the Euromaidan, the revolution of dignity, was a coup d'etat. This is all of these narratives are interconnected. That's why I just selected this one to show you as an example. These are 2 recent screenshots I made from one of the so-called TV channels, TV channel Union, which is controlled by the so-called Donetsk People's Republic. And it distributes information officially, like we presume officially, in breaks, official, so-called official information from the perspective of the so-called DNR. And here we see, for those who cannot read Russian, that they claim that also that Ukraine is a Nazi state and Ukraine can be transformed into a normal state if only after I think Russia denazifies Ukraine. And also that here on the second screenshot, you see that they claim that in Ukraine fascism rules and that Ukrainians forgot about 9th of May. For Russia, it's important to remember about, to remind about this 9th of May Victory Day, because they use it as the most important part of their history, and that they also claim that this is how they are different, let's say, from other countries and Ukraine as well. Here's another example. This is a picture from March 2014. They tried to motivate people in Crimea to go and vote on a referendum. Because, as they claimed, Ukraine is now full of Nazis, full of fascists, and Crimea would be occupied by fascists too. However, of course, this was not true, but these images were used to manipulate public opinion and to motivate them. And imagine that this is not the only one image, which was like here, in this case presented, but this image was distributed by many TV channels, by local politicians, by influence groups, and people lived in this disinformation environment, and they started, many of them, I believe, just started to believe that this is true, that there is fascism again receiving ground, appearing in Ukraine. And the next one, and the next one also is a recent example actually from Novorossiya, which is actually one of the proxy websites promoting the creation of the so-called Novorossiya in the south and east of Ukraine. And in this case, one of the so-called political expert, Rostislav Ishchenkov, who is actually Ukrainian, but writes different opinions for pro-Kremlin news outlets, claims that there is Nazism in Ukraine and that this is in its worst form possible. So like this were three examples to show you that they still use this narrative in 2021, and very frequently, actually, this is one of the most frequent narratives. Maybe not in the state-funded Russian media, because they try to point attention very often to some urgent events, but in this, the media, the proxy sites, which are controlled or financed by FSB and are targeted on the population in the occupied territories of Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast, they publish something which is connected to the so-called Nazi Ukraine every day. So the other thing is that, of course, coronavirus and Sputnik V. This narrative became very popular over the last year. And here's one of the example by proxy website Ruskaya Vesna, when they claim that Ukraine needs actually Sputnik V because otherwise Ukrainians can die. They, of course, distributed many other narratives and fakes. One of them was that Ukraine is a testing ground for different infectious diseases and biological weapon. And they blamed the United States in organizing in Ukraine the so-called 15 biolabs where they test this, as they claim, biological weapon. And they also claim that one of these, in one of these testing, one of these biolabs, they tested something which was then escaped the lab and which was actually created COVID-19. So actually, they blamed Ukraine in being this starting point of the pandemic. And also, they also use very frequently this word genocide, and they try to say that that first of all, like I would like to explain here in more detail. So here we have a quote. Actually, they give a quote of one of a people's deputy in Ukraine, who represents one of the pro-Russian parties in Ukraine, and he claimed that without Russian vaccine, Ukrainian government will commit genocide of Ukrainians, as that Ukrainians will stop dying without Russian vaccine. Another case when they use genocide is when they claim that Ukrainian forces, Ukrainian army is shelling at the citizens of the so-called DNR Elena in the eastern Ukraine, and they also commit, in this way, they commit genocide of the innocent population in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. And the third example when they use it is when they claim that Ukraine, better to say Ukrainian government, forbids Russian language, and that this also is an example of genocide of the Russians in Ukraine. So yeah, and one example of World War II and May 9th. There are many examples of this recently over the last 2 weeks. I will here just point your attention to two of these. On the first screenshot on the left, we have this title which states that the West rewrites history, and that actually they further explain, of course, that Ukraine is also doing this together with the West, to please the West, actually. and that on the right screenshot you have that here in this article they claim that this was Russia actually that contributed the biggest amount of people, of money, etc., and that actually Russia was the force, the country that, not the Soviet Union, but that Russia was the country that won and beat Hitler's Germany, and that they also they claim that Ukraine, by not celebrating the Victory Day, and the West try to take this memory from Russians and insult actually their memory. MH17, as I told you before, they have different narratives and distributed different facts concerning MH17, and they are not consistent. They are very different, and you cannot make a single picture out of them. However, they try to show that Ukraine was guilty and that Ukraine shut down the plane. Here, this infographics was prepared by EU versus Disinformation. This is just a part of it. It is a long infographic which I could not insert here, but you can find it on their website. And here they just show how their plot developed. And I would like to pay your attention that they blamed Ukraine, the United States, and different European countries in planning this disaster, and they also tried to say that either it was, in some instances they say that it was a Ukrainian aircraft, military aircraft, combat aircraft, which downed the plane, or in another case, in another week, they say that it was a Ukrainian Buk missile launcher which launched a rocket, and that's how the plane was shut down. And they also, for the last years, they also say that Ukraine and the Netherlands are trying to manipulate information concerning and trying to manipulate evidence in order to shift the blame onto Russia. And 1 second, please. Here are also some examples I give you. On this left screenshot, it is a very nice example how they not only try to present different alternative facts as they say, but also how they use numerous external actors, like some journalists or some politicians whom they actually pay or who work for their foreign organizations and receive payment from the Russian government, and they try to say that these people are independent, and they say to everyone, just see that there is an independent US or British or French analyst who says this, who says this, not us. And in this case, they refer to some American analyst, Sam Bullard, who questions the outcomes of the investigations of the joint investigation team results, and that they then share this information, saying that just see this, not us saying this, but some independent experts say this. And in this way, they also try to manipulate public opinion. And on the other two screenshots, they claim different, they have different claims. In one instance, they say that one thing, in another, they, for instance, which is also often used narrative of fact, that they just that Ukrainian military army wanted to shut down an airplane with the president of Russia. And this one was distributed many times also over the last 7 years. Yes. Ukraine is a failed state, also another popular narrative, like here, that Ukraine is divided, that Ukraine cannot exist because there are so many divisions inside Ukraine. And here I would like to refer you to this, the tool I mentioned, that they try to sow divisions And in this way, they try to like emphasize that Ukraine is divided and there are different groups of people and they cannot live together. And that's why Ukraine will be always a failed state and it will collapse anytime eventually. Yes, and here again is that some examples from the proxy websites, like that Ukraine will be divided like Poland in the 18th century, or that Ukraine does not exist as a state at all, and they refer to some Finnish political scientists, again just trying to pretend that this was said not by them but by some other external independent expert. But also they on this last screenshot they refer to the representative of the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine, which is actually the one who comments here is considered to be a very pro-Russian expert. And the fifth one is civil war in Donbass. Here some again refer to EU versus Disinfo website, which does a very great job in combining all of these narratives and analyzing what are the most widespread narratives. And here you can see some of the examples, some of the recent examples from 2020, 2021 of these most widespread narratives concerning war in Ukraine. So bring Donbass home. By this, they mean that Donbass must be returned to Russia because it's like Russian land, etc. That Ukrainian is preparing or commits a genocide. Another is that Ukraine is preparing an attack against Donbass. This was very popular in April when Russia itself tried to escalate situation on Donbass and moved troops to the eastern border, Ukrainian eastern border. However, they claim that Ukraine is trying to start an attack against Donbass, and Russia would defend the people in Donbass. Again and again, they also repeat that Ukraine kills children and is shot in villages and cities in Donbass, and that and many other actually narratives are possible, but these ones are the most widespread here. Okay, and here are some screenshots recently made by me. On the left, you can see that they claim that again for the last 7 years they've been claiming that there is no Russian troops in Donbass and that there is Ukrainian army wages a war against innocent people, which is not true, of course, and there are hundreds of thousands of pages with evidence that there are actually Russian troops in Donbass. And another important narrative or sub-narrative is that different Western actors push Ukraine to start the war against Donbass or to resume military actions in Donbass because they want to achieve their own political goals, which are, of course, as they claim, anti-Russian or Russophobic. And here I just wanted to give some interesting comparison between some past events and current events. And in this case, to use this external enemy narrative, which was used very frequently back in the 20th century and today. In the case of the Soviet Union, the West and the capitalist world, of course, was the main enemy because these were the ideological wars, and the Soviet Union tried to show that that capitalism is something bad, that it can promote it can destroy the type of a system Soviet Union builds. And here again, some examples which I believe very exemplary, instrumental to give and to have a comparison with Ukrainian case. Here we have some how Soviet Union imagined and wrote about the war with Finland in 1939-1940, and they they show that there is some European teachers of Finland or some white Finnish bandits or some other powers that use Finland as a tool to wage war against Soviet Union. The same happens today with Ukraine. As I said, in the case of Donbas, they say that there are some Western powers like the United States or the United Kingdom that push Ukraine to start a war against Donbas. So this is the same as European teachers. White Finnish bandits are today they moved further, and now they use this fascist terminology, or try to say that Ukraine is a Nazi state. And also they try to use all these words that somehow give some imagination that Ukraine becomes a really Nazi state, or really that it uses this World War II terminology to give some context for why Russia does this, and to picture Ukraine as this enemy that they have to defeat. And yes, some of the examples of NATO, because NATO today is portrayed as this external enemy which wants to which has an anti-Russian Russophobic policy. However, of course, it's not the case. And here's another example how they claim that Western press wrote different disinformation about the life in the Soviet Union. And again, they also claim, and they shift responsibility on the West and on Ukraine from themselves, in order not to implicate themselves in distributing disinformation. Okay, here are some sources that I use in this presentation, and I think that this is all from me for now. Looking forward to your questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Oleksandr, for this wonderful presentation. And at this point, we welcome comments and questions. I have this question while we are waiting for some comments about how we deal with disinformation. And I know that maybe at first glance, this question sounds quite naive, but it comes from the fact that our narrative, no matter how factually correct or accurate it can be perceived as disinformation by the other side. For example, what we offer as our narrative, or let's say Ukrainian narrative, will be perceived as disinformation by Russia. And in a postmodern world, it's quite challenging to establish some sort of the truth. We should be prepared somehow to be dealing with multiple truths. However, when some facts which could be identified as fakes are distributed, especially in this context of Russian-Ukrainian relations, it's not only about one fact, for example, or about, more often than not, or about one event. All those wonderful examples that you presented show that they trigger a lot of emotions on the one hand, and on the other hand, a lot of historical background. For example, there are references to the Victory Day. There are references to the Nazism. There are references to the occupation of Crimea, which is presented as reunification by the Russian side, and the presentation of this event as occupation in Russia will be always presented as disinformation, as propaganda. So how we deal with these, what do we do? How we create something that is presented as not an alternative fact, as not as another disinformation or fake, but as something that has some solid ground.
Okay, I personally believe that there should be some coherent image of Ukrainian coherent image concerning the main points of our state policies, and information should be actually as the journalists we should remember that we must stay professional, and we must distribute only facts and to verify information. This is the best we can do, because when we even if it's a minor, some half-truths, even if it's some minor manipulation, if we mix facts with opinion, we actually undermine our professionalism and we undermine our trust in the professional media. And by doing the small steps, by increasing our professionals, by reporting facts, by doing actually our work professionally, we can try to increase the level of trust, level of credibility into the media, because the media today is the most powerful tool. And to reach, we cannot actually reach all of the people. However, we may try to maybe to balance the information ecosystem we have. And also there is, from one side we have the media, from another side we have the state, which also has to remember that there should be done something to increase the to create this coherent image, as I said at the beginning, of the most important topics for Ukraine, and to remind that to remind these most important things to everyone, and not to forget about them.
We have a question from Hiraki Koromiya. Thank you for a very interesting talk. I think that American politics is being Russified, with Moscow-fed fake news supported by a very large section of the American political establishment. Ukraine has been fighting against Russian fake news longer than any country. We know it's been a difficult fight. What countermeasures do you think have worked best?
In terms of Ukraine, okay, yes.
Yes.
In terms of Ukraine, I believe that it was a good decision by my colleagues to launch the project, to launch StopFake in 2014, right in the beginning, and this actually motivated many people to comprehend information critically. And I guess that all the major things that were important, that were done, and that were the most useful in this way, were done by the civil society and by the media. Different projects, different types of programs that debunk disinformation, that presented factual information, that use different networks and different platforms to distribute this information. It's hard to say what will work for the United States or for other countries, because there are different political systems, there are different situations in each country. Ukraine actually was, back then in 2014, it was many pro-Ukrainian people. They felt this solidarity, they felt some kind of, they united because they felt that they knew that their neighboring country attacks their own country, attacks Ukraine. And actually, maybe if there were no war with Russia, if there were no occupation, we would probably have some other results. But this all, I believe, combined into this strategies that we later developed, and into the results that we had.
We have a question from Sarah Phillips. There is an old saying that any joke has a grain of truth. It seems that one main technique of those fabricating disinformation is to take a small grain of truth, reality, and blow it way out of proportion. Would you agree that this is a common, often effective technology of disinformation? Effective because it is easier to defend this information because it has a tiny basis in truth.
Mm. I can actually agree with that, and that here they both combine some emotions, and they combine something that might not be regarded as a fake, because there is no sometimes they do this which is called half-truths or some deliberate manipulation, when they just reinterpret some facts, or they just give some sort of opinions, and in this way you cannot directly debunk it, because it stands like half in between. And of course you cannot debunk something which is a joke, of course, if it's not completely untrue.
I would like to go back to your comment about those strategies that we can apply to deal with disinformation. And you said that some cohesive narrative is needed. And in Russia today, there is a very coherent narrative which is supported by the state. And unfortunately, in spite of the fact that Russia is a multi-ethnic country, there is only one pro-Russian narrative, and it is barely open to any kind of diversity of opinions. Do we have a narrative, a more or less coherent narrative in Ukraine today? And if yes, what that narrative is? If no, what elements, at least, are we trying to combine in order to produce this more or less coherent narrative in Ukraine?
I would say that we have some coherent, of course, narratives, which are not maybe supported by everyone. Some, first of all, pro-Russian politicians, they try to question these narratives. And here I mean that Ukraine is a European country, the one of them, and that Ukraine aims to become the part of the EU and NATO. Another narrative is that Ukrainian territories are occupied by Russia. However, also these pro-Russian politicians sometimes question this, and they try to say that there is some kind of a civil war in Donbass. Another is that Crimea is occupied and that we have a war with Russia. Maybe some of these narratives are not shared by everyone, but they are shared by most of the people in Ukraine, including at the moment main politicians and MPs, the president. I hope at least what they say publicly, they support this narrative, and media as well. They try to support this narrative to a degree possible.
Mm-hmm. I remember a few years ago there was an initiative to launch a program in schools to teach young pupils, young students, how to identify disinformation and fakes. Do you know anything about that initiative? Did it have any kind of development?
I know that there are a few initiatives at the moment in Ukraine. The aim of these initiatives to increase media literacy of pupils and of actually people, Ukrainian citizens in general. I know that there were several books for the schools were published, and at the moment there are obligatory courses of media literacy in some of the schools. Maybe there will be courses of media literacy in school in every school of Ukraine, and as far as I know, our Ministry of Education and civil society, different project groups, they move into this direction. So it did not end; it still develops.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking about one of the slides that you showed, and it said that in Russia, Ukraine is quite often accused of revising history. Would you comment on that? Because, of course, this kind of narrative about revisions is put in a very negative context. However, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, I thought it's quite natural that a newly independent state will somehow reconsider its history or will rediscover its history. However, in Russia today, it is presented as Ukraine is revising history, and the state is actively employing some nationalistic narratives. And of course, again, it is put in a highly negative context, in spite of the fact that Russia is basing its policy also on highly nationalistic narratives.
Yes, it happens, and they report about this. And actually, I would say maybe 80% of what they report about in terms of Ukraine revising history concerns the Victory Day. And recently they said that Ukraine no longer celebrate the Victory Day, and that Ukraine forgets about it and tries to revise history in the way to be on the side, as they say, to be on the side of these who lost in the war. And that Ukraine, like since, as they claim, Ukraine became a Nazi state, for Ukraine it's not wise to celebrate the victory against Nazis, because Ukraine itself became a Nazi state. And that another thing is that they also try to say that Ukraine claims, wrongly claims that the Soviet Union was one of the states that started World War II, which is actually true, because you know of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, but they say that this was only a defensive agreement, not offensive, and that this is, I would say, this is probably one of the most important things, besides revisiting the Victory Day as a day of some festivities, celebrations, and that Ukraine tries to revise historical books concerning Ukrainian place in the Russian Empire, relations with Russia, the relations with Crimea, etc. And however, it would be even, I would say, probably easier to find examples when Russia revises history, and it does this often and in many ways, and it also like trying to say that allied power, so Ukraine did not contribute to the victory in 1945, and denigrating the role of Ukraine actually in establishing the United Nations as an international organization, denigrating Ukrainian roles in developing the industrial power of the Soviet Union, etc. And probably also what they mention is that how Ukraine, I just reminded myself that how Ukraine rewrite the history of the OUN-UPA, which Russia claims were Nazis collaborators, and Ukraine now claims were the groups that fought for the independence of Ukraine. And the third one probably would be Holodomor, when they say that there was no Holodomor, and claim and lead Ukraine in trying to present Holodomor as a genocide of the Ukrainian nation. So I would say this are the three main directions, the three main like examples they use in trying to say that Ukraine rewrites history.
Maybe we can talk a little bit about international initiatives that Ukraine should be probably promoting more intensely in order to create its own narrative and its own history and its own story that is telling to the to the West. And here I'm referring to the comment that was already made by Hiroaki Kuromiya, and the comment said that unfortunately in the West, in America, the context is very much Russified, and American politicians and sometimes American educators also take this Russo-centric Russocentric strategy when teaching the history not only of Russia, but of the history of the USSR, and including the history of Ukraine as well. To some extent, also, I'm referring to Sarah Phillips' comment about a grain of truth, because there is a grain of truth in this seemingly Russocentric narrative, because for an extended period of time, Ukraine was under the control of the Russian Empire, and then later under the control of the Soviet Union. But the thing is that these narratives, Russocentric narratives in the West, are so long-standing and so clear and so familiar that the narrative that comes from Ukraine, let's say, is perceived a priori as something as propaganda or as something as nationalist narrative. And again, in this case, I use this word in that negative context, which is very popular among those who talk about Ukraine. So when we offer something alternative, it's very difficult to not persuade our listeners and readers and our audiences, but at least to deliver this narrative in a productive way, because what we have to do is just to persuade people that we are not propagandists, that it's not propaganda, that it's a narrative which is based on the facts, on the stories, on the histories, that is actually delivered by those who study Ukrainian case. So what are those international initiatives that Ukraine can probably embrace or can promote in a more effective way?
I believe that it's actually a very, very difficult question, and we cannot, I believe we cannot achieve this, what you're saying about in a matter of years even. So because this, there is some tradition of understanding this in the way it is understood in the West. And we only at the beginning of this policy, of this at the beginning of this direction. There are some positive developments have been made. Actually, one of them is that many countries in the world recognize the Holodomor as a genocide, and many countries today support Ukraine and Ukrainian territorial integrity and sovereignty. And I would like to remind you that in March 2014, the General Assembly of the United Nations voted in favor of supporting supporting Ukraine in the case of Crimea, not Russia. However, of course, there are some problems with presenting Ukrainian image, Ukrainian worldview, Ukrainian narratives among Western audiences. And here I believe that there should be some constant movement into this direction by using media, by using diplomatic and consular services, and it might help maybe investing some additional money into promoting Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian history, etc. By maybe publishing some books, etc. So people abroad can get aware of this Ukrainian history and Ukraine as a state, actually, and to open Ukraine to as many visitors, foreign tourists as possible, so they can come to Ukraine and then share their experience among their friends and among their relatives. I know that there are some international, let's say, international projects that Ukraine have and had, like the one is Kyiv, not Kyiv, which tries to change this the way Ukrainian capital is spelled, is written in Western media, because many still write Kyiv instead of Kyiv. There are some cultural diplomacy projects which try to explain to the foreign audiences the different aspects of Ukrainian culture. But these are only some examples. I guess there are, of course, there are more examples. And of course, yeah, in this way, I believe that probably our Ministry for Foreign Affairs and Diplomatic Services must work more, work better in this direction to promote Ukrainian culture. But I still believe that it will take years to even change opinions, change narratives, because they are so grounded. They are so like they are very familiar to the people, which and this new narrative has to be like developed and has to be implemented still.
Mhm. Thank you. And we have one more question from Sarah Phillips. Has StopFake been able to forge partnerships with any Russian news outlets that are invested in challenging disinformation?
What I know is that we sometimes republish in our context page, context section, some debunks made by the Insider. It's a Russian web, is a Russian outlet, online outlet, and they often debunk some facts about Europe or about Ukraine, and we sometimes republish them. However, we do not strongly cooperate with any Russian media at all.
Well, thank you so much, Oleksandr, for this wonderful presentation and for this wonderful conversation. Thank you for guiding us through the anatomy of disinformation and for sharing that wonderful collection of fakes and disinformation narratives that you collected. Thank you so much. And of course, I wish you good luck on your research at Indiana University.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Today we spoke with Oleksandr Yaroshchuk, who presented on Russian disinformation war against Ukraine, examples of strategic narratives. Thank you so much for attending our lecture today. Information about upcoming events will be posted on the Ukrsol listserv and on our Facebook page, Ukrainian Studies Organization at Indiana University. You can view previous lectures and talks on our YouTube channel, and for future recorded events, please subscribe to our channel. Again, thank you so much for attending our event today.